when we were in YC, we were roommates with another YC company, and we were sort of like observing this chatbot boom that was happening at the time. But it was very clear that chatbots, if you wanted to build them, and this is funny to say in retrospect, required lots of data, and required lots of human elbow grease, to be able to get them to work effectively. And so just kind of off the cuff at one point, I was like, oh, what if you just did that? What if you just did the data and the language data and the human data, so to speak, for the chatbot companies? We were also very lost, by the way. I think you probably remember we were quite lost mid batch, and like many YC companies, I think. And so then we switched to this concept. I think the initial idea was API for human tasks or something along those lines. And one night I was just trolling around for domains. ScaleAPI.com was available, and then we just bought it. I mean, I think it was 3 days for us to put up the landing page. It launched on Product Hunt. It's funny because the initial phase, we just worked with all these engineers who reached out to us from that Product Hunt, which was a real grab bag of use cases. But then that was enough for us to raise money at the time, and and to get going. And then a few months after that, it became clear that self-driving cars was actually the first major application that we needed to focus on. I would say that the thing that was as actually fundamental to the success of the company was actually focusing on this seemingly very narrow problem of self-driving cars. I think that I remember very early on when it was maybe 6 months after we were out of YC. Basically, there was another YC company, Cruise, that had reached out to us on our website, and sort of in the blink of an eye, they became our largest customer. So then early on, we made this decision, and I remember we went to our lead investor at the time, and we had this conversation. It's hey, actually, we think we should probably just focus on this self-driving thing. It was actually a very interesting conversation, because the reaction was oh, that's just obviously way too small a market. And you're never going to build a gigantic business that way. And it's funny looking back, because both things are true. It is both true that it enabled us to build the business to get to scale very quickly. And it is also true that that was not a big enough market to sustain a gigantic business. I think startups, you kind of have to switch modes at a certain point, where early on, you're trying to go for very, very narrow markets. You're almost the narrowest markets you can. And then you're just trying to gain momentum, and then sort of slowly grow out from those hyper narrow markets. And then at some point, if you have ambitions to be a $100 billion company or more, then you have to sort of switch gears and say, where are the infinite markets? And how do you build towards those infinite markets?